As the bitter winter winds howled across the Wyoming Territory, Josephine Anderson clutched her twin babies tighter against her chest, her thin shawl offering little protection against the merciless December storm of 1878. The snowflakes, once gentle and beautiful, now stung like tiny daggers against her face as she trudged forward, her faith in humanity as frozen as her trembling fingers. The stagecoach that had abandoned her outside Alta, Wyoming, was long gone, leaving only disappearing wheel tracks in the rapidly accumulating snow. Josephine had begged the driver not to leave her, explaining that her husband's letter had promised to meet her here. But the man had merely laughed, tossed her small trunk into the snow, and declared that his schedule couldn't wait for no-show husbands. "Hush now, my loves," she whispered to 5-month-old Emma and Ethan, their tiny faces peeking out from the bundle of blankets she'd wrapped them in. Their whimpers tore at her heart. "Mama will find a shelter." But as the daylight faded and the temperature plummeted, Josephine's desperation grew. The small mining settlement of Alta should have been visible by now, but the blinding snow made navigation impossible. Each step became more difficult than the last, her sodden skirts weighing her down like iron chains. When she spotted a lone pine tree offering minimal shelter, Josephine collapsed beneath it, using her body to shield her children from the wind. Tears froze on her cheeks as the terrible truth settled in her heart: they might not survive the night. Her husband's promises of a new life in the West had led her here, only for her to discover through a telegram at their last stop that he had died in a mining accident weeks ago. With nowhere to return to in Boston and barely enough money for food, she had continued the journey, praying for mercy in Alta. "I'm so sorry, my darlings," she whispered, kissing their foreheads as they cried weakly against her chest. "I've failed you." Miles away, Dawson Lawson pulled his hat lower against the driving snow as he urged his horse homeward. The 30-year-old rancher had spent the day searching for stray cattle, and the sudden storm had caught him farther from his cabin than he'd intended. "Just a bit further, Thunder," he encouraged his faithful bay stallion. "Then it's a warm stable for you and a fire for me." Dawson had lived alone since establishing his small ranch 5 years ago, after years of driving cattle and drifting across the frontier. The solitude suited him, or so he told himself, though the empty cabin sometimes echoed with a loneliness he refused to acknowledge. As Thunder carefully navigated a slope, Dawson narrowed his eyes against the snow. Something dark contrasted against the white landscape, something that didn't belong. He tugged the reins, changing course to investigate. "Hello," he called, his voice carrying poorly in the howling wind. As he drew closer, his heart hammered against his ribs. A woman, nearly covered in snow, sat propped against a tree. And in her arms, Dawson dismounted quickly, were what appeared to be bundles of blankets. "Madam," Dawson knelt beside her, brushing snow from her face. Her skin was frighteningly cold, her lips blue. For a terrible moment, he thought he'd discovered only bodies, until her eyelids fluttered weakly. "My babies," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, save my babies." Dawson gently moved the blankets and gasped when he saw 2 tiny faces, remarkably still pink-cheeked despite the cold. The twins whimpered softly, a sound that speared straight through his heart. "I've got you," he said firmly, his mind racing with what needed to be done. "All of you. You're going to be all right." With practiced efficiency, Dawson secured the babies inside his heavy coat, buttoning them against his chest where his body heat would warm them. Then he lifted the nearly unconscious woman into his arms and, with considerable effort, managed to get her onto Thunder's back before mounting behind her. "Hold on," he urged, supporting her limp form with one strong arm while gripping the reins with his other hand. My place isn't far. The journey seemed endless, with Dawson constantly checking the precious cargo against his chest and the woman who occasionally stirred against him. By the time his cabin came into view, night had fully descended, and the temperature had dropped even further. Dawson wasted no time. He carried the woman inside first, laying her on his bed before carefully extracting the twins from inside his coat and placing them beside her. They were crying more strongly now, a good sign. He immediately set to building a fire, his fingers working swiftly as he placed kindling and logs in the stone fireplace. Within minutes, flames leapt upward, beginning to chase away the cabin's chill. Dawson filled a kettle with water and hung it over the fire, then turned his attention to his unexpected guests. The woman remained worryingly still, though her breathing seemed steady. The babies, however, were now crying lustily, their tiny fists waving in the air. "You've got some spirit there," Dawson murmured, carefully unwrapping the first baby. He was no expert, but he knew enough to check for frostbite. To his relief, their extremities seemed unaffected. "Let's get you warm and fed, and then we'll help your mama." Finding cow's milk in his cold storage, Dawson warmed it slightly and, using a clean cloth dipped in the milk, managed to feed the hungry infants. Their eager suckling brought a smile to his weathered face. "You two are fighters," he told them softly. "Just like your mama must be, bringing you this far." As the cabin gradually warmed, Dawson turned his attention to the woman. Her clothing was soaked through, which posed a dangerous problem. Hesitating only briefly, he decided that propriety mattered less than survival. With careful respect, he removed her outer garments, wrapped her in his warmest blankets, and placed heated stones near her feet. In the firelight, he could see her properly for the first time. Despite the ordeal she'd suffered, her beauty was evident. Delicate features, long eyelashes resting against pale cheeks, and chestnut hair that tumbled loose from what had once been an elegant arrangement. She couldn't be much older than 25, he guessed. "What's your story?" he wondered aloud, gently rubbing warmth back into her hands. "And how did you end up alone in that storm with these little ones?" As if hearing his question, she stirred, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal eyes of striking hazel. For a moment, confusion clouded her expression before sudden panic seized her. "My babies," she gasped, trying to sit up. "They're right here," Dawson assured her, gesturing to the twins now sleeping peacefully beside her. "They're fine, stronger than they look. You kept them alive." Relief washed over her face before suspicion replaced it. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Where am I?" "Dawson Lawson, madam. You're at my ranch about 3 miles east of Alta. I found you and the little ones nearly buried in snow." He offered her a cup of warm tea he'd prepared. "Can you tell me your name?" She accepted the cup with trembling hands. "Josephine Anderson. My twins are Emma and Ethan." Tears suddenly filled her eyes. "You saved us. We would have died out there." "Anyone would have done the same," Dawson replied, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "No," Josephine whispered. "They wouldn't." She took a sip of tea before continuing. "The stagecoach driver left us there, even when I begged him to take us to town. Said my husband should have been waiting as arranged, and it wasn't his problem that the man hadn't shown." Anger flashed across Dawson's face. "That's unconscionable. Who was this driver?" "It doesn't matter," Josephine said wearily. "My husband, he isn't coming. I received word at our last stop that he died in a mining accident 3 weeks ago." A sob escaped her. "I had nowhere else to go, so I continued to Alta as planned. I thought perhaps someone might help a widow with young children." Dawson's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Anderson." He hesitated before adding, "The storm's likely to keep us snowed in for at least a couple of days." You and the little ones are welcome to stay until it passes and you decide what you want to do." Josephine's eyes met his, gratitude shining through her tears. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "No need for repayment," he replied gruffly. "Now try to rest. Those babies will need you at full strength soon enough." As Josephine drifted back to sleep, Dawson settled into his chair by the fire, watching over the unlikely family that fate had delivered to his doorstep. Something unfamiliar stirred in his chest, a protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. These vulnerable souls needed him, and somehow that felt right in a way nothing had for a very long time. The storm raged through the night, but inside the cabin, warmth prevailed. Dawson woke at dawn from his uncomfortable position in the chair. His neck protested as he straightened, but the discomfort vanished when he heard soft cooing sounds. Josephine sat propped against his pillows, a baby at each breast, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and tender love. "I'm sorry," she said when she noticed him awake. "I didn't want to disturb you, but they were hungry." Dawson quickly averted his eyes, a flush creeping up his neck. "No apologies needed. This is your space while you're here." He busied himself stoking the fire. "Are you feeling better?" "Much," Josephine replied, "though I'm still quite weak. I haven't eaten properly in days." That spurred Dawson into action. "I'll remedy that right away," he declared, moving to his small kitchen area where he began preparing a simple but hearty breakfast of oatmeal, dried apples, and coffee. While he worked, he asked carefully, "Your husband, was he a miner in Alta?" Josephine adjusted one of the twins before answering. "Thomas came west 8 months ago. He wrote of rich silver deposits and promised to establish us a home before sending for me." Her voice grew softer. "I waited in Boston until after the twins were born. His letters became less frequent, but the last one contained money for our passage and instructions to take the stagecoach to Alta where he would meet us." Dawson nodded, familiar with the story. Many men came west with dreams that the harsh reality quickly crushed. "The telegram, did it say how it happened?" "A tunnel collapse," Josephine replied, her composure remarkable despite the subject. "They said it was quick, at least." She looked down at her babies. "I sold everything to come west. There's nothing for us back east." Dawson brought her a steaming bowl. "Alta's a small settlement, but there are good people there. Once the storm passes, I can take you into town." Josephine accepted the food gratefully. "I don't want to impose on your kindness any longer than necessary, but I fear I've nowhere to go and very little money." Dawson sat on the edge of the bed, his expression serious. "Mrs. Anderson, you won't be left without options. I give you my word." As the day progressed, Dawson found himself increasingly captivated by Josephine's resilience. Despite her ordeal, she insisted on helping with chores once the twins were settled. Her quiet dignity impressed him as much as her gentle way with the babies. "Have you been ranching long?" she asked as she folded his freshly laundered shirts, her slender fingers moving deftly despite their recent exposure to the elements. 5 years on my own," Dawson replied, whittling a small wooden horse by the fire. "Worked other men's cattle for 10 years before that, saving for my own place." "It's beautiful land," Josephine observed, glancing out the frost-covered window at the snow-blanketed expanse. "Even in this weather." "You should see it in spring," Dawson said, a rare smile softening his features. "Wildflowers everywhere and the grass so green it hurts your eyes." Josephine returned his smile. "I'd like to see that." The words hung between them, laden with possibilities neither dared acknowledge. By the third day the storm had subsided, but the snow remained deep. Josephine had regained her strength, and the twins thrived under the shared care she and Dawson established. To his surprise, Dawson found himself eagerly participating in their care, marveling at how quickly he'd learned to distinguish between Emma's demanding cries and Ethan's more patient ones. "You're a natural," Josephine commented one evening as Dawson paced the cabin, gently bouncing Ethan against his shoulder to soothe the colicky infant. Dawson looked startled. "Never been around babies before. Guess they're not as complicated as people make out." Josephine laughed, a melodious sound that warmed the cabin more effectively than the blazing fire. "Or perhaps you simply have a gift. Emma certainly adores you." As if to prove her point, the baby girl in Josephine's arms reached toward Dawson, her tiny face lighting up at the sight of him. "The feeling's mutual, little one," Dawson said softly, his heart expanding in ways he hadn't thought possible. That night, after the twins were asleep in the makeshift cradle Dawson had constructed from a wooden crate, they sat before the fire drinking coffee. The comfortable silence between them had become familiar, but Dawson knew they needed to discuss practical matters. "The trail to town should be passable tomorrow," he began reluctantly. "I can take you in the sleigh." Josephine's hands tightened around her cup. "Yes, I suppose that's best." Neither spoke for a long moment. Finally, Dawson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Anderson, please call me Josephine," she interrupted. "After all we've shared, formality seems unnecessary." Dawson nodded. "Josephine, then, and I'm Dawson." He hesitated, gathering his thoughts. "I've been thinking about your situation. Alta has no hotel to speak of, and while the general store owner's wife might take in boarders occasionally, it's no place for a woman alone with 2 infants. "I'm aware my prospects are limited," Josephine acknowledged, her expression brave despite the fear in her eyes. "Perhaps there's need for a laundress or seamstress. I'm skilled at both." Dawson set down his cup decisively. "I have a proposition if you'll hear it." Josephine looked at him expectantly. "My ranch is modest but growing. I've got 50 head of cattle, good grazing land, and this cabin which I've been meaning to expand." He spoke carefully, measuring each word. "What it lacks is a woman's touch and, frankly, purpose beyond mere survival." He met her gaze directly. "I'm proposing that you stay, Josephine, not as a charity case but as a partner of sorts." Her eyes widened. "A partner? I need help with the homemaking side of ranching the garden, preserving food, maintaining a proper home. Things I've neglected in favor of the cattle." He gestured around the functional but sparse cabin. "In exchange, you and the twins would have a permanent home, security, and my protection." "That's very generous," Josephine said cautiously, "but would people not talk? A single woman living with an unmarried man." Dawson ran a hand through his dark hair. "I considered that. We could tell folks you're my widowed sister, come west with her children after losing her husband." Josephine was silent for so long that Dawson began to regret his suggestion. Finally, she spoke. "Your offer is practical and kind, but I wouldn't feel right accepting it under false pretenses." She straightened her shoulders. "If I stay, it will be honestly, as a housekeeper perhaps, with proper boundaries established." Dawson nodded, oddly relieved by her integrity. "That's fair. I have a small bunkhouse where I can sleep. You and the children can have the cabin." "You would give up your home?" Josephine asked, clearly surprised. "It's just a building," Dawson replied simply. "And only until I finish the addition I've been planning. Then there'll be proper separate quarters for all of us." Josephine studied him intently, as if searching for hidden motives in his weathered face. Apparently satisfied, she extended her hand. "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Lawson Dawson. The twins and I will stay and contribute what we can to your ranch." Dawson took her hand, struck by how perfectly it fit within his larger one. "Then it's settled. Welcome home, Josephine." The journey to Alta the following day was necessary despite their arrangement. Josephine needed supplies, and Dawson insisted on helping her file a claim for any benefits owed to her as a minor's widow. The small settlement consisted of little more than a general store, a say office, saloon, and scattered dwellings clustered around the silver mine that was its reason for existence. Not much to look at, Dawson apologized as he helped her from the sleigh, the twins bundled securely in a basket between them. It's civilization, Josephine responded with a small smile. Something I wasn't certain I'd see again a few days ago. Inside the general store, their arrival created an immediate stir. The proprietor, Harold Jenkins, a portly man with suspicious eyes, stared openly at Josephine and the twins before turning to Dawson. "Lawson, don't often see you in town twice in 1 month," he remarked, his gaze sliding back to Josephine. "Special circumstances," Dawson replied evenly. "This is Mrs. Anderson. She'll be keeping house at my ranch." Jenkins' eyebrows shot up. "Is that so, and these little ones?" "Her children," Dawson answered, his tone making it clear further questions would be unwelcome. "Mrs. Anderson's husband was to meet her here, but she received word he died in a mining accident before she arrived. I found her, and the twins caught in the storm." The storekeeper's wife, Mabel, emerged from the back room, her initial curiosity quickly transforming to sympathy. "You poor dear, out in that terrible storm with babies." She hurried forward, peering into the basket. "Oh, they're beautiful, and twins. How old are they?" 5 months, Josephine replied, grateful for the woman's warmth. "Emma and Ethan. They need everything," Dawson interrupted. "Proper clothes, diapers, whatever else babies require. And Mrs. Anderson needs suitable attire as well. Her trunk had little of use after being abandoned in the snow." Mabel clucked her tongue disapprovingly. "Was it that awful Pierce who left you? He's done similar before, cares more for his schedule than human decency." "Yes, I believe that was his name," Josephine confirmed. "Well, don't you worry. We'll get you sorted right out," Mabel declared. She looked at Dawson speculatively. "You're doing a Christian deed, taking in these poor souls." Dawson shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Anderson's agreed to maintain my household. It's a fair arrangement for us both." Mabel's knowing smile suggested she thought there was more to the story, but she simply nodded. "Well then, let's see about those supplies." While the women gathered necessities, Dawson visited the assay office to inquire about Josephine's late husband. The clerk confirmed Thomas Anderson had indeed perished in a collapse 3 weeks earlier. "There's a small death benefit," the clerk explained, "though most of his earnings went to fund his wife's journey west. There's also his claim stake." "His claim?" Dawson asked, surprised. "Was it producing?" The clerk consulted his records. Nothing substantial yet, but he'd found promising indications. The claim remains his widow's property for 90 days following his death. After that, it reverts back to available territory unless she formally registers her intent to maintain it. Dawson rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Draw up the paperwork for Mrs. Anderson to review." By the time they departed Alta, the sleigh was laden with supplies, and Josephine had officially claimed her widow's benefits and filed preliminary paperwork to maintain her husband's mining claim. Though she confessed to Dawson, she had no idea what to do with it. "We can figure that out later," he assured her, "one step at a time." As they traveled back to the ranch, Josephine observed, "People seemed surprised by our arrangement." Dawson kept his eyes on the snowy trail. "Folks will talk regardless of what we do. Best to give them the plain truth and let them make of it what they will." "And what is the plain truth, Dawson?" Josephine asked quietly. "Am I truly just a housekeeper to you?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Dawson guided the horses around a drift before answering. "I don't rightly know what you are to me, Josephine," he admitted. 4 days ago you were a stranger. Now." He trailed off, uncertain how to articulate the connection he already felt to her and the twins. "Now we're bound together by circumstance," Josephine finished for him. Dawson nodded slowly. "For now, let's call it that. Time will tell what comes next." The days stretched into weeks as winter maintained its grip on the Wyoming landscape. Josephine transformed Dawson's utilitarian cabin into a home, adding small touches that reflected her refined Eastern background: crocheted doilies beneath oil lamps, curtains fashioned from spare fabric, shelves rearranged to display the few books they possessed. Dawson, true to his word, slept in the small bunkhouse despite the bitter cold, joining Josephine and the twins in the cabin during daylight hours. Together they established a routine, he handling the outdoor chores and livestock, she managing the domestic sphere, both of them sharing in the twins' care. To Josephine's surprise, her days became deeply satisfying. The physical labor of homesteading, churning butter, preserving game Dawson brought home, keeping the cabin clean gave her a sense of purpose she'd never experienced as a merchant's daughter in Boston. She discovered muscles she hadn't known existed and took pride in her increasing capability. Dawson, meanwhile, found himself hurrying through ranch work to return to the cabin, drawn by the unprecedented warmth of having others waiting for him. He'd never considered himself lonely before, but now he wondered how he'd tolerated the silence for so long. One evening in late January, as a particularly fierce blizzard howled outside, Josephine sat mending one of Dawson's shirts while he carved tiny wooden animals for the twins, who slept peacefully in their cradle. "I received a letter from Thomas's parents today," she said suddenly, setting aside her sewing. Dawson looked up, instantly alert to the tension in her voice. "What did they say?" Josephine sighed. "They want me to return to Boston with the twins. They've offered to take us in, raise the children as Andersons." Her fingers twisted in her lap. "They never approved of Thomas marrying beneath his station. I was merely a shopkeeper's daughter after all. But they're determined their grandchildren should have the advantages of their name and position." Dawson set down his carving knife carefully. "Is that what you want, to return east?" "No," Josephine answered without hesitation. "But they make compelling arguments about the children's future education, society, opportunities I can't provide here." "Those things matter less out here," Dawson observed, "but I understand their concern." Josephine met his gaze directly. "Do you think I'm being selfish, keeping them in this wilderness when they could have comfort and privilege?" Dawson considered her question seriously. "I think children need love more than privilege. They need to see strength and honesty in those raising them." He gestured to the sleeping twins. "Those two have a mother willing to face death to give them a chance. That's worth more than any fancy Boston education." Tears glistened in Josephine's eyes. "Thank you for that. I've been questioning my judgment since receiving their letter. Will you write back?" Dawson asked, trying to keep his tone neutral despite the dread settling in his stomach at the thought of them leaving. "Yes," Josephine replied. "I'll thank them for their offer but explain we've established a new life here." Her expression became earnest. "That is, if you still wish us to stay. I realize we've disrupted your solitary existence considerably." "Josephine," Dawson said softly, "this cabin hasn't been a home until you and the twins arrived. I'd be grateful if you stayed, for as long as you wish." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings deeper than their practical arrangement. Josephine's cheeks flushed as Dawson's gaze lingered on her face, neither quite ready to name the emotion growing between them, but both increasingly aware of its presence. February brought milder weather and the first hints that spring would eventually arrive. Dawson began work on the cabin addition, laboring from dawn till dusk when ranch duties allowed. Josephine watched his progress with both admiration and confusion. "You're building 3 additional rooms," she noted one evening as they reviewed his plans spread across the table. "That seems excessive for our needs." Dawson traced the rough sketch with his finger. "A proper bedroom for you, one for the twins, and a third," he hesitated, "for the future." "The future," Josephine repeated, her heart quickening. Dawson met her questioning gaze steadily. "I'm building for permanence, Josephine, for a family." The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Josephine found herself unable to look away from his earnest blue eyes, seeing in them a longing that matched her own growing feelings. "Dawson, she began, but was interrupted by Emma's hungry cry from the cradle. The moment passed, but something had been acknowledged that could not be undone. As February gave way to March, the snow began to recede, revealing patches of earth beneath. The ranch demanded more of Dawson's attention. With spring approaching, fences needed repair, cattle required tending as calving season neared, and supplies from Alta became necessary more frequently. During one such trip to town, Dawson encountered Samuel Pierce, the stagecoach driver who had abandoned Josephine and the twins in the snowstorm. The man was lounging outside the saloon, apparently between routes. "Lawson," Pierce greeted him with casual indifference. "Heard you took in that woman and her brats. Turned your bachelor paradise into a nursery, eh?" Dawson's hands clenched at his sides. "That woman nearly died because of you, Pierce. Her babies too." Pierce shrugged, unconcerned. "Not my problem her husband didn't show. I've got schedules to keep." Before he could react, Pierce found himself slammed against the saloon wall, Dawson's forearm pressed against his throat. "Listen carefully," Dawson growled, his voice dangerously quiet. "If you ever speak disrespectfully about Mrs. Anderson or her children again, I'll make sure you regret it. And if you ever put another passenger in danger the way you did her, I'll personally ensure you never drive another stage in this territory." Pierce's face had paled considerably. "Easy, Lawson. No harm meant." "There was plenty of harm done," Dawson replied, releasing him with a disgusted shove. "Remember what I said." Word of the confrontation spread quickly through Alta's small community. By the time Dawson completed his errands, he could feel curious eyes following him. Mabel Jenkins cornered him in the general store. "That was quite a display for a mere housekeeper, Mr. Lawson," she observed slyly while wrapping his purchases. Dawson counted out payment without responding. "Of course, no one would blame you," Mabel continued. "She's a pretty young widow, and those babies are precious as can be. Natural a man might develop feelings." "Mrs. Jenkins," Dawson finally replied, "Josephine Anderson is a remarkable woman who deserves respect, regardless of my personal feelings." Mabel's eyes twinkled. "So there are personal feelings, then?" Dawson sighed, recognizing defeat. "Good day, Mrs. Jenkins." Her laughter followed him out of the store. When he returned to the ranch, Dawson found Josephine in the vegetable garden she'd started beside the cabin, the twins napping in a basket under the shade of a nearby tree. The sight of her hair tied back with a simple ribbon, sleeves rolled up as she worked the soil, filled him with a contentment he'd never imagined possible. "You're back earlier than expected," she called, straightening to wipe her brow. Dawson unloaded his purchases before joining her. "Got what we needed without delay." Josephine studied his face. "Something happened in town. I can see it in your expression." Dawson considered deflecting but decided on honesty. "I encountered Pierce, the stagecoach driver." Josephine stiffened. "I see, and we had words," Dawson admitted. "He was disrespectful about you and the twins." "Words?" Josephine pressed, noting the scraped knuckles on his right hand. Dawson had the grace to look slightly abashed. Mostly words. He'll think twice before speaking of you that way again. Josephine shook her head but couldn't entirely hide her smile. You shouldn't have risked trouble on our account. It wasn't a risk, Dawson replied seriously, and it was worth it. Their eyes met, and Josephine felt the now familiar flutter in her chest that Dawson's presence increasingly caused. Over the past months, she'd come to admire not just his physical strength, though the sight of him working shirtless on the cabin addition had certainly captured her attention, but his quiet integrity, his gentle way with the twins, and the respect with which he treated her. People will talk, she said softly, echoing their earlier conversation. They already are, Dawson confirmed. Mrs. Jenkins had plenty to say about my defending your honor. Josephine's cheeks colored. And what did you tell her? That you deserve respect regardless of my personal feelings. And what are your personal feelings, Dawson? Josephine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dawson stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. I think you know, Josephine. I'd like to hear you say it, she replied, her heart racing. Dawson gently took her soil-smudged hands in his. I've fallen in love with you, he said simply. With your strength, your kindness, your devotion to those babies. I love the family we're becoming, even though I never thought I'd want one. He smiled slightly. I love how you fold your clothes just so, and how you hum when you cook, and how fiercely you protect those little ones. Tears filled Josephine's eyes. I've been afraid to acknowledge what I was feeling, she confessed. It seemed too soon after Thomas, too convenient in our situation. I worried you might feel obligated. There's no obligation in love, Dawson said firmly, only choice. And I choose you, Josephine, you and Emma and Ethan, if you'll have me. Instead of answering with words, Josephine rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Dawson's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally separated, both breathless, Dawson rested his forehead against hers. I take it that's a yes, Josephine laughed softly. That's a yes, Dawson Lawson, I love you too. A demanding cry from the twins' basket interrupted the moment. Josephine smiled ruefully. Duty calls. Dawson kept his arm around her as they walked to check on the babies. I wouldn't have it any other way. Spring arrived in earnest by April, transforming the landscape just as Dawson had promised. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows surrounding the ranch, and the grass grew lush and green. The cabin addition progressed steadily, with Dawson working every available moment to complete it before summer. Their relationship blossomed alongside the season, though both agreed to proceed with propriety. Dawson continued to sleep in the bunkhouse, now with considerably more reluctance, and they planned to marry once the addition was complete. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Alta, generating mostly good-natured gossip and a few raised eyebrows at the speed of the romance. Mabel Jenkins took particular satisfaction in having predicted the match and appointed herself unofficial wedding planner. Nothing elaborate, Josephine insisted during one of Mabel's visits to the ranch. Just a simple ceremony with a few witnesses. Nonsense, Mabel declared. Alta hasn't had a proper wedding in 2 years. Everyone's looking forward to celebrating. Dawson, wisely, stayed out of these discussions, focusing instead on completing their home and preparing the ranch for its first full season with a family to support. One evening in late April, as Josephine sat on the porch nursing Ethan while Emma slept inside, Dawson joined her, looking unusually serious. I visited your husband's claim today, he said without preamble. Josephine looked up in surprise. She had all but forgotten about Thomas's mining stake. Whatever for? Been meaning to assess it for a while, Dawson explained. Thought I should understand what assets you're bringing to our marriage. It's likely worthless, Josephine replied. Thomas never mentioned finding anything significant. Dawson sat beside her, his expression unreadable. I brought back some samples for the assayer to examine. He hesitated. Josephine, I'm no expert, but if what I saw is consistent throughout the claim, it could be valuable. Valuable how? She asked, adjusting Ethan as he finished nursing. Potentially very valuable, Dawson clarified. Enough to change our circumstances considerably. Josephine considered this information. Would that please you? If we suddenly had wealth, Dawson chose his words carefully. Money brings options. We could expand the ranch, hire help, provide more for the twins. He looked out over the land he'd worked so hard to cultivate. But I've seen what the hunger for silver does to men. I wouldn't want that for us. Nor would I, Josephine agreed. She reached for his hand. If the claim proves valuable, we'll use it wisely for the children's education, perhaps, or to secure our future. But this, she gestured to the ranch around them, this is the life I've chosen, Dawson, the life I love. The relief on his face was evident. I worried you might long for the comforts wealth could bring. Josephine shook her head. I've learned what truly matters. It isn't silver or status. She looked down at Ethan's peaceful face. It's love and security, it's family. Dawson leaned over to kiss her gently. Then we're of one mind, as always. 2 weeks later, the assayer confirmed Dawson's suspicions. The samples showed a rich silver vein that likely extended throughout the claim. He estimated its potential value at several $1,000s, a fortune by frontier standards. The news brought both excitement and sobriety. After careful discussion, Dawson and Josephine decided to lease the claim to the mining company rather than work it themselves, providing a steady income while allowing them to focus on the ranch and their growing family. By early May, the cabin addition was complete, transforming the modest structure into a proper home with separate bedrooms and an expanded living area. The day after the final touches were applied, Reverend Collins from the small church in Alta arrived to perform their wedding ceremony. Despite Josephine's wishes for simplicity, it seemed half the settlement had journeyed to witness the occasion. Women brought food and flowers. Men arrived with bottles of whiskey and handmade gifts. The ranch yard became an impromptu celebration ground, with tables fashioned from boards and sawhorses. Inside the cabin, Mabel Jenkins helped Josephine dress in a new blue gown purchased specially for the occasion. "You're radiant, my dear," Mabel declared, arranging Josephine's hair with motherly care. "Dawson won't know what hit him." Josephine smiled nervously. "I still can't quite believe this is happening. 6 months ago, I was a proper Bostonian heading west to an uncertain future. Now you're about to marry a fine man who adores you and those babies," Mabel finished for her. "Life has mysterious ways, doesn't it?" "Indeed it does," Josephine agreed, thinking of that terrible snowstorm that had nearly claimed their lives but had instead led them to Dawson. "I never expected to find love again so soon." Mabel squeezed her hand. "The heart knows what it needs, regardless of society's timetables. You and Dawson were meant for each other, anyone can see that." Outside, Dawson waited nervously beside Reverend Collins, uncomfortably conscious of his best shirt and the curious gazes of their guests. The twins, dressed in their finest clothes, were being fussed over by several admiring women. Harold Jenkins approached, offering Dawson a congratulatory sip from his flask. "Never thought I'd see the day you'd settle down, Lawson." Dawson accepted the flask with a nod of thanks. "Neither did I." "She's a fine woman," Harold continued, "and those twins are growing like weeds." "You're a lucky man." "Believe me, I know it," Dawson replied sincerely. The cabin door opened, and conversation ceased as Josephine appeared. Dawson's breath caught at the sight of her, not just her beauty in the new dress, but the love shining in her eyes as she walked toward him, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken clearly for all to witness. When Reverend Collins pronounced them husband and wife, Dawson gathered Josephine into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to more than one observer's eyes. "Mrs. Lawson," he murmured against her lips. Josephine's smile could have outshone the sun. "Mr. Lawson." The celebration continued well into the evening, with music from a fiddle someone had thoughtfully brought, dancing in the yard, and enough food and drink to satisfy even the hardiest appetites. Throughout it all, Dawson rarely left Josephine's side, his expression one of contented disbelief at his good fortune. As twilight descended, guests gradually departed, leaving the newlyweds to their privacy. Mabel was the last to leave, after helping settle the sleepy twins in their new bedroom. "Congratulations, you two," she said warmly, embracing them both. "May God bless your union and your family." When they were finally alone, Dawson closed the cabin door and turned to his bride with reverent eyes. "I scarcely know where to begin," he admitted. "I've thought about this moment for months." Josephine stepped into his arms, resting her head against his chest. "We have all night," she reminded him, "and all the nights thereafter." Dawson tilted her chin up for a kiss that promised many such nights to come. "I love you, Josephine Lawson. More than I thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, her heart full. "You saved us in that snowstorm, but you've given us so much more than just our lives. You've given us a home, a future, a family." Later, as they lay entwined in their new bedroom, Josephine drowsily traced patterns on Dawson's chest. "Do you ever wonder at the circumstances that brought us together? If Thomas hadn't died, if the stagecoach hadn't abandoned us, if you hadn't found us in that storm?" Dawson captured her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I prefer to think it was meant to be," he said simply. "All those terrible things led to something beautiful." Josephine smiled against his shoulder. "Then I'm grateful for them all, even the snowstorm." "Especially the snowstorm," Dawson agreed, drawing her closer. Summer passed in a blur of activity, ranch work, caring for the twins as they grew increasingly mobile, and adjusting to life as a married couple. The silver mine began producing steadily, providing additional income that they carefully invested back into the ranch, expanding their herd and improving their facilities. By October, with winter once again approaching, they had established themselves as one of the more prosperous small ranches in the region. Their home, once Dawson's lonely bachelor cabin, now hummed with life and laughter. On a crisp autumn evening, as they sat on the porch watching the twins toddle in the yard, Josephine took Dawson's hand and placed it on her stomach. "I have news," she said, her eyes sparkling. Dawson's expression transformed from confusion to wonder. "Are you certain?" Josephine nodded. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday while you were delivering cattle in Alta. We'll welcome a new Lawson in the spring." Dawson whooped with joy, lifting Josephine from her chair and spinning her around. "A baby, our baby." "Yes, our baby," Josephine laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "The twins will have a little brother or sister." Setting her gently back on her feet, Dawson knelt to place a reverent kiss on her still flat abdomen. "Hello in there," he whispered. "Your papa can't wait to meet you." Josephine's heart swelled as she watched Dawson's tender gesture. Never could she have imagined, during that terrible night in the snowstorm, that such happiness awaited them. "What are you thinking?" Dawson asked, rising to embrace her. "That sometimes the darkest storms lead to the brightest days," Josephine replied, leaning into his strength. "And that I'm tremendously glad you found us that night." "So am I, my love," Dawson murmured against her hair. "So am I." 5 years later, the Lawson Ranch had expanded considerably. The original cabin, though still standing, now served primarily as Dawson's office. Adjacent to it stood a handsome two-story home, built with lumber from Alta's sawmill and furnished with a mixture of handcrafted pieces and occasionally indulged luxuries ordered from catalogs. A spring morning found Josephine in the kitchen, kneading dough while supervising 6-year-old twins Emma and Ethan as they practiced their letters at the table. 4-year-old James played with wooden blocks on the floor, occasionally disrupted by his 2-year-old sister Catherine, who delighted in toppling his careful constructions. The sound of hoofbeats announced Dawson's return from the north pasture. The children immediately abandoned their activities, racing to the door to greet their father. "Papa's home," Emma called, always the first to spot him. Josephine wiped her hands on her apron and followed the excited children onto the porch. Dawson dismounted, his face lighting up at the sight of his family. In the 5 years since their marriage, he had retained his rancher's toughness but had softened around the edges, his smile coming more readily, his laughter a common sound in their home. "There's my army," he called as the children swarmed him. He scooped up Catherine with one arm and ruffled James's dark hair with his free hand. "And how are my scholars today?" he asked the twins. "I wrote all my letters without a mistake," Emma announced proudly. "I only made 2, Ethan added with equal pride. Dawson nodded seriously. "Fine work, both of you. You'll be teaching me soon enough." Josephine descended the steps to greet her husband with a kiss. "Welcome home. You're earlier than expected. Couldn't stay away," Dawson replied, his eyes warm as they met hers. Even after years of marriage, Josephine still felt that familiar flutter when he looked at her that way. "Besides, I've news from town." Once inside, with the children returned to their activities and the youngest 2 down for naps, Dawson shared what he'd learned. "The railroad's coming through," he announced. "Not directly through Alta, but close enough, about 5 miles south. They're establishing a proper station." Josephine sat across from him at the kitchen table. "That will change everything." "Indeed it will," Dawson agreed. Property values, cattle prices, access to markets all improved, and no more 3-day journeys to reach a proper town. They had discussed this possibility for years, watching as the transcontinental railroad gradually extended its reach. The implications for their ranch were significant. "Do you think we should expand again?" Josephine asked, considering the additional grazing land they'd purchased the previous year. Dawson rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Perhaps, though I'm more inclined to improve what we have: better breeding stock, more efficient operations, quality over quantity." Josephine nodded, appreciating as always his measured approach. "The children will benefit from easier access to schooling." "That they will," Dawson agreed. The twins currently learned from Josephine and occasional visiting teachers, but a proper school had long been on their wish list. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Dawson and Josephine sat on the porch swing, a ritual they'd maintained since building the new house. The ranch spread before them, peaceful in the gathering dusk. "Sometimes I can scarcely believe this is our life," Josephine murmured, leaning against Dawson's shoulder. "From that desperate night in the snowstorm to this 4 beautiful children, a thriving ranch, a proper home." Dawson's arm tightened around her. "It's been quite a journey." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found us that night?" Josephine asked. It was a question she rarely voiced, though it occasionally haunted her dreams. Dawson was quiet for a long moment. "I used to," he finally admitted. "But I've come to believe some things are meant to be, Josephine. I was meant to find you, just as you were meant to continue westward after learning of Thomas's death." He kissed the top of her head. "We were meant to build this life together." Josephine nestled closer, content with his answer. "I believe that too." They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared, each reflecting on the unexpected path that had led them to this moment, a path that had begun in the darkest circumstances, but had led to the brightest of futures. "You know," Dawson said suddenly, "I've been thinking about that fire I built the night I found you." "What about it?" Josephine asked. "It was just a simple thing, wood, kindling, a match, basic survival." His voice grew thoughtful, but it changed everything. Josephine smiled, understanding his meaning perfectly. "The smallest flames often lead to the greatest warmth." Dawson turned to kiss her properly, still marveling after all these years at how perfectly she fit in his arms. "I love you, Josephine Lawson. More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." "And I love you," she replied, her heart full. "My cowboy, my hero, my home." Above them, stars scattered across the Wyoming sky like diamonds on black velvet, bearing witness to a love that had begun in desperate circumstances, but had flourished beyond all expectations, a love born in a snowstorm, but destined to burn warm and bright for all their days.